April 12, 2026, Islamabad, Pakistan, 5:30 in the morning local time. Inside the Serena hotel sealed off from the rest of the city by more than 10,000 security personnel, by paramilitary forces, by military cordons that had closed major highways and sealed the red zone for 48 hours the most. Consequential diplomatic conversation in decades was ending. Not with a handshake, not with a signed document, not with the announcement that a 6-week war that had killed thousands, closed the world's most important shipping lane and pushed oil above $100 per barrel had finally found its resolution. With a press conference, American Vice President Vance, who had flown from Joint Base Andrews on April 10 on Air Force Two, who had sat across a table from Iranian officials for 21 consecutive hours, who had spoken with the American president by phone as many as a dozen times during those 21 hours, walked out of the Serena hotel and told the world, "The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America." 21 hours, the first direct face-to-face meeting between American and Iranian officials since 2015, the highest-level talks between the two governments since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the moment that Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Army Chief Asim Munir, and Foreign Minister Ishaq had spent weeks building toward deploying every relationship, every diplomatic channel, every piece of institutional credibility Pakistan possessed had ended with Vance boarding Air Force Two, giving a thumbs-up to cameras and leaving Islamabad without a deal. Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who led Tehran's delegation of 70 officials, had his own assessment. The opposing side ultimately failed to gain the trust of the Iranian delegation in this round of negotiations. No deal, no trust, and a fragile 2-week ceasefire which had only been holding since April 8th, now thrown into uncertainty. This is the complete story of what happened in Islamabad, every verified fact, every confirmed statement, every detail of the 21 hours that the world was watching, and what the collapse of those talks means for the war, for the global economy, and for every household whose financial life is connected to whether the Strait of Hormuz reopens or stays closed. To understand why the Islamabad talks happened and why they failed, you need to understand the 6 weeks that made them both necessary and nearly impossible simultaneously. February 28, 2026, Operation Epic Fury begins. United States Central Command, in coordination with Israeli forces in Operation Roaring Lion, launches the largest American military campaign in the Middle East since the 2003 Iraq invasion. In the first 12 hours, nearly 900 strikes are conducted. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is killed in his compound in Tehran. Dozens of senior Iranian officials die alongside him. Iran's nuclear facilities are struck, air defense systems are targeted. The American president's stated objective: destroy Iran's nuclear program permanently and eliminate the threat of an Iranian nuclear weapon. What followed was 6 weeks of military operations that produced outcomes radically different from what the stated objectives implied. Iran's response: horizontal escalation, striking all 6 Gulf Cooperation Council members simultaneously in a single coordinated operational window, was a military doctrine that no American war planner had fully anticipated. Iranian missiles struck Saudi oil infrastructure. Dubai International Airport was closed. Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG complex, the single largest LNG export facility on the planet, the backbone of European energy security, was struck and forced into emergency shutdown. The Strait of Hormuz was declared subject to Iranian security controls. 150 tankers sat anchored in open waters outside the strait. America fired more than 2,400 Patriot interceptor missiles, nearly 5 years of annual production. 40% of THAAD interceptors were expended. At least 30 American aircraft were destroyed, including an F-35 that was shot down using Chinese-supplied anti-stealth radar technology and Baidu satellite navigation that American jamming cannot disrupt. 2 of America's 5 EC-130H electronic warfare aircraft, irreplaceable systems with no production line currently active, were damaged in a single Iranian precision strike at Prince Sultan Air Base using a $20,000 Shahd drone. The American president's approval rating fell to -17%. Oil climbed above $100 per barrel. The American president announced 5 different war objectives in 6 weeks. Iran's conditions for ending the war remained unchanged throughout. On March 31, China and Pakistan issued a joint 5-point peace initiative. On April 1, the American president claimed Iran had asked for a ceasefire. On April 7, with the war in its 41st day, the American president told reporters Iran doesn't have to make a deal. Within 2 to 3 weeks, we'll leave. There's no reason for us to do this. But Pakistan had been working quietly for weeks longer than most people realized. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had positioned Pakistan as the mediator that both sides trusted. Pakistan had provided soldiers to guard the Saudi royal family for decades. Pakistan shared a land border with Iran. Pakistan's Army Chief Asim Munir had relationships across the region's security establishment that no other country could replicate. On April 8, Day 42, Pakistan's mediation produced the thing that 41 days of bombing had not, a 2-week ceasefire. Iran agreed. The American president announced it on Truth Social, praising Pakistan's leadership and naming both Shehbaz Sharif and Asim Munir by name in the announcement. It was the first pause in active hostilities since February 28. The ceasefire created the window. Pakistan offered Islamabad as the venue. 10,000 security personnel sealed the city. The Serena hotel was requisitioned, guests asked to vacate. Islamabad declared public holidays for April 9 and 10 to clear the capital for the talks. Foreign journalists received visa on arrival arrangements. Shuttle transport between the media center at Jinnah Convention Center and the Serena Hotel was organized. The stage was set for the highest level US-Iran talks since the formation of the Islamic Republic. What happened in those 21 hours is the story that every person on Earth needed to understand, and most of the world was watching. The American delegation that flew into Islamabad numbered approximately 300 officials, staff, technical experts, and security personnel. The Iranian delegation numbered approximately 70. The American side was led by Vice President Vance, the first vice president to lead a direct diplomatic engagement with Iran in the modern era. Alongside Vance sat Steve Witkoff, the American president's special envoy for peace missions, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor. Andrew Baker, the deputy national security advisor, was also present. Michael Vance, the vice president's national security advisor, rounded out the senior American team. The Iranian side was led by Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, not the foreign minister alone, which signaled to diplomatic analysts that Iran had elevated the seniority of its delegation. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi sat alongside Ghalibaf, along with political, security, and economic officials covering the full range of issues on the negotiating agenda. Pakistani leadership, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Foreign Minister Ishaq, and Army Chief Asim Munir played the role of active intermediaries, shuttling between delegations, facilitating communication when direct conversations stalled, and maintaining the diplomatic atmosphere that kept the talks going through the night. The talks began on Saturday local time and ran continuously through the night into Sunday morning, 21 hours in total. CNN's N.I.C. Robertson, reporting from Islamabad, described watching the sun go down and come up again as the marathon negotiations continued inside the Serena Hotel. Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Bagheri provided the most detailed public account of what was discussed. In a statement posted to X at approximately 5:30 a.m. local time, Bagheri confirmed that in the past 24 hours, discussions were held on various dimensions of the main negotiation topics, including the Strait of Hormuz, the nuclear issue, war reparations, lifting of sanctions, and the complete end to the war against Iran and in the region. For issues, the Strait of Hormuz, the nuclear program, war reparations, complete end to the war including Lebanon. These are not surprising as the central points of disagreement. They are exactly the issues that Iranian officials had been publicly identifying as non-negotiable since February 28. What was significant about Bagheri's statement is what it implies about what the two sides were actually negotiating, not whether these issues would be addressed, but how they would be addressed. The nuclear issue became the clearest public point of collapse. When Vance walked out of the talks and faced reporters, he was asked what terms Iran rejected. His answer was precise. The simple fact is we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. And then, the question is, do we have a fundamental commitment of will from the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now? Not just 2 years from now, but for the long term. We haven't seen that yet, we hope we will. The American position, stated as clearly as any American negotiating position has been stated in this conflict, is a permanent, verified, comprehensive commitment from Iran to abandon any nuclear weapons capability forever. Iran's position, stated equally clearly by its delegation, is that it will not surrender its rights under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, including the right to peaceful nuclear energy. Al Jazeera's Osama bin Javed, reporting from Islamabad, identified the specific American demand that Iran found impossible to accept. What the U.S. is essentially asking Iran now is that they give up their right to any nuclear program, even for medical purposes, he said. No enrichment, not just weapons-grade enrichment, any enrichment, including the enrichment required to produce fuel for civilian nuclear power plants, including the enrichment required to produce medical isotopes for cancer treatment. Iran's parliamentary speaker Ghalibaf was direct about what happened in his post-talk statement. On X, before the negotiations, I emphasized that we have the necessary good faith and will, but due to the experiences of the two previous wars, we have no trust in the opposing side. My colleagues on the Iranian delegation raised forward-looking initiatives, but the opposing side ultimately failed to gain the trust of the Iranian delegation. In this round of negotiations, trust, not just policy gaps, trust. Iran has watched the American president leave the 2015 JPO, a nuclear agreement that his predecessor's administration negotiated, has watched American commitments reversed by subsequent administrations, has watched a ceasefire announced and then watched Israel strike more than 200 Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. The 24 hours while the ceasefire was supposedly in effect, has watched the American president announce simultaneously that talks were proceeding well and that a deal was not entirely necessary. "We're negotiating," the American president told reporters on Saturday while the talks were ongoing. "Whether we make a deal or not makes no difference to me, because we've won." You do not build trust with a counterpart by telling reporters publicly, while they are sitting across the negotiating table from your delegation, that making a deal with them makes no difference to you. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Bagher, in a calmer tone than the American vice president's post-talk statement, identified what he described as disagreement on 2 or 3 key issues and said diplomacy never comes to an end, a less definitive tone than Iranian state media, which had reported that Tehran had no plans for another round of negotiations. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq characterized the 21 hours as intense and constructive diplomatic language for 2 delegations that talked seriously and disagreed substantially. He urged both sides to continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire and urgency, suggesting that the ceasefire's survival was not guaranteed. While the delegations were inside the Serena hotel for 21 hours, 3 significant events were occurring outside the room simultaneously, each one affecting the atmosphere, the trust calculation, and ultimately the outcome of the talks. The first was the American military's Strait of Hormuz action. On Saturday, April 11th, while the talks were underway, U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyers passed through the Strait of Hormuz, the first American warship transit since the start of the war 6 weeks earlier. United States Central Command confirmed it had begun setting conditions to clear Iranian sea mines planted throughout the waterway and said it would share this safe pathway with the maritime industry soon to encourage the free flow of commerce. Admiral Brad Cooper, head of United States Central Command, issued the statement while his vice president was supposedly negotiating with Iran about the strait's status, including Iran's demand for sovereignty over the waterway and its right to charge vessels passing through. Iranian officials demanding sovereignty over the strait and the right to charge ships a passage toll of up to $2 million per vessel, revenue that would benefit the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, were watching American warships transit the same waterway and American military mine-clearing operations begin while the negotiations about those exact issues were ongoing. From the Iranian perspective, this was not a good faith confidence-building measure. It was the American military unilaterally asserting the outcome of the negotiation before the negotiation was complete. Bagher's statement that the success of the talks depended on refraining from excessive demands and unlawful requests reflected this dynamic. The second was Israel's continued Lebanon campaign. As the US-Iran talks were running through Saturday night and Sunday morning in Islamabad, Israel's military struck more than 200 targets in Lebanon affiliated with Hezbollah in a 24-hour period. Lebanese state media reported Israeli warplanes striking towns across southern Lebanon, artillery fire, overnight attacks. Casualties. Iran's delegation in Islamabad had arrived with an explicit demand: any ceasefire agreement must include Lebanon. The comprehensive end to hostilities must cover all fronts simultaneously. Iran will not accept a deal that stops the bombs on Iranian territory while Israeli strikes on Iranian-backed forces in Lebanon continue without constraint. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a statement during the Islamabad talks that left no ambiguity. "Israel under my leadership will continue to fight Iran's terror regime and its proxies," he posted on X. Netanyahu also said Israel was seeking a deal with Lebanon but separately, not as part of the Iran ceasefire framework. Yechiel Leiter, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, spoke to the Lebanese envoy in Washington for the first time but said Israel would not accept a ceasefire with Hezbollah on the terms Iran was demanding. America cannot deliver an end to Israeli operations in Lebanon as part of a US-Iran agreement. The Israeli government is not under American command. Netanyahu has made clear that his coalition government's survival depends on continuing military operations that his partners consider existential. American pressure on Israel to stop Lebanon operations as a condition of Iran peace has political costs that no American administration has been willing to pay publicly. Iran knows this. Iran's demand that Lebanon be included is not naive about the limits of American influence over Israeli behavior. It is a demand structured around those limits, one that America structurally cannot fulfill, giving Iran a legitimate reason to declare any agreement incomplete. The third outside-the-room development was the American president's continued public commentary. While Vance was inside negotiating, the American president was on Truth Social posting that Iran's whole civilization will die if Iranian leaders did not agree to a deal. He was telling reporters that whether a deal was made makes no difference to me because we've won. He was saying he had previously floated the idea of joining Iran in collecting tolls from Strait of Hormuz vessels and then walking those comments back. 500 days of combined negotiating experience at the table, a president simultaneously threatening annihilation and walking back deal offers in public statements, Iran's spokesperson calling it a sea of mistrust. This is the environment in which the 21 hours were supposed to produce the most consequential diplomatic agreement since the 2015 GPOA. Iran's state media summary was blunt. Excessive US demands had sunk the possibility of an agreement. The United States had not succeeded in gaining the trust of the Iranian government. Vance left Islamabad with a statement that was both a departure and a warning. We leave here with a very simple proposal, a method of understanding that is our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it. Final and best offer, a deadline embedded in diplomatic language. America has given its terms. Iran has them. Now Iran must decide. The American president, following the collapse of the talks, threatened what he described as a full naval blockade on Iran, a military escalation that would represent a significant expansion of American operations beyond the air campaign that has been the conflict's primary military tool for 6 weeks. A naval blockade of Iran is not a simple operation. Iran controls the northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Its mine-laying operations have already placed thousands of mines in Gulf waters. CENTCOM confirmed beginning mine-clearing operations but acknowledged the process takes time. Iranian coastal defense missiles, naval assets and drone swarms cover every navigable kilometer of the waterway. The ceasefire that Pakistan brokered on April 8 and that the American president and Iranian foreign minister both announced is now in a state of described uncertainty. Pakistan's foreign minister Ishaq urged both sides urgently to continue to uphold their commitment to ceasefire language that suggests the ceasefires continuation is not guaranteed without active maintenance. Iran delivered its response to the United States via Pakistan following the failed talks, rejecting the American proposal and presenting its own 10-point counter-proposal. The 10-point plan includes a solution to all regional conflicts, full war reparations, lifting of all sanctions, comprehensive security guarantees, and Iranian sovereignty acknowledgement over the Strait of Hormuz. 10 points versus America's framework. Iran's counter is more comprehensive than its previous 5 points, expanding rather than narrowing its demands after 21 hours of negotiations failed to produce American flexibility on the nuclear issue. Iranian state media reported that Tehran currently has no plans for another round of negotiations. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Bagher struck a slightly less definitive tone. Diplomacy never comes to an end, but the immediate institutional position from Tehran is that the ball is in Washington's court, accept Iran's terms, or demonstrate the flexibility that the Islamabad delegation failed to show. Russia called for restraint from all parties, urging a responsible approach and expressing concern that forces may be attempting to obstruct progress toward peace, language that pointed toward continued Israeli military operations in Lebanon as the external factor threatening ceasefire stability. France expressed support for the talks and called for de-escalation. President Emmanuel Macron said he had urged Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian to use the negotiations to achieve lasting de-escalation before the talks collapsed without producing it. The Islamabad collapse has immediate and measurable financial consequences that are already being priced into global markets as of April 12. Oil prices, which had fallen slightly during the ceasefire period on hopes that the Islamabad talks would produce a deal, are facing renewed upward pressure following Vance's announcement. Goldman Sachs Research's energy modeling estimates that a sustained Hormuz closure without resolution produces oil prices between $100 and $130 per barrel. The ceasefire created a partial pressure release. The failed talks reintroduced the full risk premium. The Strait of Hormuz mine clearing operation that CENTCOM announced adds a new variable. CENTCOM said it had begun setting conditions to create a safe passage but confirmed that mine clearing takes time. Iranian mine-laying vessels, the American president claimed all 28 mine-dropper boats were sunk, represented a persistent threat to any vessel attempting transit. Insurance markets will not normalize until physical mine clearance is verified and confirmed by independent maritime assessment, not just American military statements. 150 tankers remain anchored outside the strait. They have been waiting since early March. The cargo they carry represents billions of dollars of energy supply for Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Germany, France, the United Kingdom. South Korea announced weeks ago it could face LNG shortages within 9 days at current consumption rates. The South Korean government created an emergency stabilization fund equivalent to $68 billion to cope with energy costs. Germany's industrial base has been making emergency shutdown calculations for weeks. For American households, every additional week of unresolved strait closure means elevated gasoline prices maintained at or above their current levels. The American Automobile Association's tracking data has documented the sustained price elevation with multiple states above $5 per gallon and California above $6. At premium stations, the International Monetary Funds estimate every 10% increase in energy prices sustained through 2026 raises global inflation by half a percentage point applies with full force to the current situation. The Federal Reserve cannot cut interest rates into an environment where energy-driven inflation remains unresolved. Every month of delayed rate cuts is a month of higher mortgage costs, higher car loan expenses, higher business credit costs. The Congressional Budget Office has already identified debt service costs as one of the fastest growing line items in the federal budget, and the Iran conflict's emergency defense spending is adding to the trajectory that the CBO warned about before the war began. For every American household that took out a 30-year mortgage in the past 3 years, roughly 2 million households per year at typical market activity levels, the difference between a resolved Iran conflict and a continued stalemate is measured in thousands of dollars in lifetime mortgage interest, not abstract financial theory. Real dollars in real monthly payments. The Islamabad collapse has created 3 distinct trajectories, each with specific financial and geopolitical consequences. Scenario 1: Iran accepts the American final offer 25%. Vance's final and best offer language contains an implicit ultimatum: accept these terms or face resumed military operations and the threatened naval blockade. If Iranian leadership, calculating the economic cost of continued closure and the military cost of naval blockade, concludes that the American offer is preferable to continued conflict, a deal could emerge within days without a new round of face-to-face talks. The financial consequence: oil falls rapidly towards $75 to $80 as strait reopening becomes credible. Gasoline prices follow within 2 to 3 weeks. Inflation pressure eases. Federal Reserve gains room to cut. Mortgage holders get the relief they have been waiting for. The strategic cost: America achieves the nuclear commitment it sought, but only after 6 weeks of a war that cost $3 billion in equipment, 15 American lives, and demonstrated F-35 vulnerability, EC-130H damage, and Patriot stock depletion to every adversary in the world. Scenario 2: extended talks through Pakistan 45%. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq said Pakistan will continue to play its role. The most probable scenario is that the Islamabad failure is a pause, not an ending. A second round of talks, potentially in Islamabad again, potentially in a different format, is organized within 2 to 3 weeks as both sides absorb the first round's lessons. The ceasefire holds fragile but functional, with both sides de facto observing it while publicly maintaining their positions. Iran submits its 10-point counterproposal through Pakistani channels. American negotiators review it. A modified framework emerges that addresses enough of both sides' core requirements to produce a partial agreement: nuclear inspections in exchange for sanctions relief, strait opening in exchange for economic guarantees, Lebanon addressed through a separate framework. For you, oil remains elevated between $85 and $100 through the extended negotiation period. Financial relief arrives eventually, but later than a quick acceptance would produce. Cumulative household financial damage from the extended timeline is real and measured in thousands of dollars. Scenario 3: military escalation 30%. The American president's naval blockade threat was not rhetoric. American military planning for a Strait of Hormuz naval operation exists. The 2 destroyers that transited the strait on Saturday were a demonstration of capability and of will. If Iran refuses the American final offer, and if the American president concludes that another round of talks serves Iranian interests more than American ones, military operations resume. A naval blockade of Iran in waters strewn with mines covered by Iranian coastal defense missiles and drone swarms is an operation with significant escalation risk. Every mine that damages an American vessel, every naval confrontation in the narrow strait, every Iranian proxy activation that follows military resumption brings the conflict closer to the 30% scenario threshold that risk models have been assigning to catastrophic escalation since the war began. For you, this scenario is the one where the financial consequences are structural rather than cyclical: oil above $130, Treasury yields spiking, mortgage rates jumping, Federal Reserve facing impossible choices, financial damage that compounds over years rather than months. April 12, 2026. Islamabad, Pakistan. Vance gave a thumbs up and boarded Air Force 2, 21 hours, the highest level US-Iran meeting since 1979, the most consequential diplomatic engagement of the 6-week war, and it ended with each side saying the other failed them. Vance said Iran refused to commit to not developing nuclear weapons. Ghalibaf said America failed to gain Iran's trust. BK said excessive US demands killed the deal. Pakistan said it will keep trying, and outside the Serena hotel outside the red zone that 10,000 security personnel had sealed for 48 hours. The world is still waiting for the thing that 21 hours of the most important diplomatic conversation in decades could not produce. A way out of a war that has cost 15 American lives, $3 billion in equipment, 2,400 Patriot missiles, and oil above $100 per barrel. The ceasefire is fragile, the threats are real, the naval blockade option is on the table, Iran's 10-point counter-proposal is in Pakistani channels. And the financial consequences of whatever happens next will arrive in your household statements faster than any official announcement. Subscribe, because the next 48 hours will determine which of the three scenarios this war moves toward, and when it becomes clear you are going to want to have seen this first.